The storm hit Carveth Prime without warning, as all storms on that forsaken moon did. Elara Quinn had been conducting her xenobiological survey when the sky turned the color of old bruises, and the wind began to scream. She'd found the den purely by accident, a crack in the basalt cliff face, barely visible through the rust-colored vegetation. The crying had drawn her closer. Not the mewling of helpless infants, but the desperate guttural sounds of young predators calling for parents who would never return. Inside, huddled against the stone, were 4 Carveth strikers. Even as cubs, they were formidable, six-legged, scaled, with nascent fangs already visible in their trembling jaws. Their bioluminescent patterns flickered weakly across their flanks, the biological equivalent of distress signals. The orbital scans had shown the adult strikers being caught in a plasma surge 2 days prior. These cubs had been alone since then, and now the storm would finish what starvation had begun. Elara's survival instinct screamed at her to leave. Strikers were apex predators, responsible for 3 deaths in the colony's short history. Their venom could paralyze a human in seconds. Their claws could shred environmental suits like tissue paper, but these weren't predators, not yet. These were children, abandoned and afraid. The smallest one, barely the size of a terrier, stumbled toward her on unsteady legs. Its eyes, triple-pupilled and gold, fixed on her with desperate hope. It made a sound somewhere between a whimper and a chirp. "Easy," Elara whispered, extending her hand slowly. "Easy there." The cub sniffed her gloved fingers, then pressed its scaled head against her palm. The bioluminescent patterns on its body shifted to a pale blue, the color, according to her research notes, of trust. The storm's roar intensified. Through the den opening, Elara could see the ionized particles beginning to dance through the atmosphere. In minutes, this entire cliff face would be bombarded with radiation that would cook anything organic. She made her decision in heartbeats. Elara unfastened her thermal cloak, the only thing standing between her and hypothermia once the temperature dropped. It was designed for 1 human, but she spread it on the ground and began gathering the cubs. 3 came reluctantly, their survival instincts warring with their fear of the strange alien creature. But the small one, the one who had approached her first, climbed onto the cloak immediately and settled against her leg. "Smart kid," she muttered, wrapping them all together. The cloak's smart fabric contracted, forming a protective cocoon. She activated the thermal regulators, diverting power from her suit's reserves to keep them warm. The cubs huddled together, and the small one, she decided to call him Rovak, after an old Earth legend about a wolf cub, burrowed into the folds near her chest. His tiny claws caught in the fabric, and he refused to release his grip even when she tried to adjust her position. "All right, Rovak," she said softly. "You can stay there." The storm hit with the force of an orbital hammer. Elara positioned herself at the den's entrance, using her own body as a windbreak. The first gust nearly knocked her off her feet, but she planted her boots and held firm. Behind her, she could hear the cubs' frightened cries muffled by the cloak. The radiation began next, invisible but deadly. Elara's suit alarms screamed warnings, listing exposure rates that climbed by the second. She'd disabled the automatic retreat protocols. There was nowhere to retreat to. The emergency shelter was 3 kilometers away, and the cubs couldn't make that journey. So she stood, ice crystals formed on her visor. The temperature had plummeted 40 degrees in as many seconds. Without her cloak, the cold bit through her suit's insulation like acid. She could feel her fingers going numb, then her toes. The shivering started, violent, uncontrollable. Through the howling wind, she heard Rovak's chirp, felt his claws tighten through the fabric. He was afraid, but he was alive. They all were. That was enough. Time became meaningless. Seconds stretched into eternities. The radiation counter in her HUD climbed past safe limits, past survivable limits, into ranges marked with red skulls and warnings about cellular degradation. The cold worked its way into her bones, making every breath an agony. But she didn't move. Humans, she'd learned in her xenobiology courses, were the universe's great anomaly. Not the strongest, not the fastest, not the most intelligent by many measures, but possessing a trait that baffled every species that studied them: the willingness to sacrifice themselves for others, even for those who might one day hunt them. The evolutionary biologists called it maladaptive. The philosophers called it humanity's greatest weakness. Elara called it what her grandmother had called it: being decent. When the storm finally broke, Ilara collapsed. She came to in the colony's medical bay, her body wrapped in regeneration fields. Director Yashin stood over her, his expression caught between fury and awe. "You nearly died," he said flatly. "Radiation sickness. Severe hypothermia. Another hour and we couldn't have saved you." "The cubs." Her voice came out as a croak. Yashin's expression softened. "Alive, all four. We've set up a habitat in the xenobiology wing. Rovak won't eat unless—" He paused, looking uncomfortable. "Unless someone brings him a piece of your cloak." "He carries it everywhere," Ilara smiled despite the pain. "He can keep it." The story spread through the colony, then to the orbital stations, then across the communication networks to the wider galactic community. Humans, those strange primates from Sol 3, who would face death itself to protect the young of species that saw them as prey. The Karveth Council, observing from their homeworld, watched the security footage in silence, watched this small human stand against a storm that would have killed any of their warriors, watched her sacrifice her protection so that cubs, not even her own species, might live. "This is why they are dangerous," one counselor said. "No," the eldest corrected, her scales shimmering with respect. "This is why they are invaluable." 3 months later, when Rovak and his siblings were ready for release, Ilara stood at the habitat entrance. The cubs had grown, their predatory features now unmistakable, but when Rovak saw her, his bioluminescent patterns flashed that same pale blue. He approached slowly, no longer stumbling, and pressed his scaled head against her palm one final time. Then he turned and led his siblings into the wilderness, carrying with him a small scrap of thermal fabric clenched gently in his jaws. Some bonds, Ilara realized, transcended species, transcended reason. They were forged in storms, wrapped in sacrifice, and measured not in logic but in love. And that, perhaps, was what made humanity truly extraordinary.